All right. Well, welcome everyone to our Moderating 101 kind of like workshop um, conversation with Ruby. And this kind of came about, knowing I've been talking to a couple different ambassadors who are taking on a little bit of moderating roles for different panels that they're hosting for remake events, or just generally been kind of interested in having this conversation. I recommended to do this with Ruby because this summer I was on one of my first largest panels and Ruby was the moderator. And I know I was kind of nervous. And then she walked me through, made me feel comfortable as a panelist. We had a good prep and conversations. And then we can talk about this later. I then had like the biggest tech flub ever. So kind of like your worst nightmare coming true. And Ruby was like seamless in managing that. The audience, they knew I was hopping in and out, but their experience was still really high quality. So she's seen a little bit of everything. So I have a couple questions for Ruby, so we can get a better understanding of how she preps for these moderating in panels, how she runs a panel, and a little bit of background on herself as well. So Ruby, if you want to kick us off with an intro, and then I know we have a couple questions to run through too.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to those who are joining today. My name is Ruby Veridiano, and I am a Remake ambassador. So I've been working with Remake for a few years and have had the pleasure of moderating a few panels and also developing and facilitating workshops for Remake in several different cities like New York and Spain and in the Netherlands. So it's been really fun, but I'm based out of Paris, France. I'm a sustainable fashion journalist and educator. I host a show called Grit and Glamour, which is an online video show, and it has a podcast version as well that really is designed to empower young women of color to be fashion change makers. But of course, even though I do have this intention to reach young women of color, it is available to anybody who's interested in being a change maker, either as a consumer or as a young professional in the industry. But aside from all of that, before I got into this world, I want to just share a little bit of my background pre this life, because in my early 20s, I was a performing artist and I was a television host. So I know that now everyone is suddenly being asked to go on video through random Zoom conferences at work or panels that your work or maybe your school or even Remake is asking you to join. And maybe it feels tempting to compare yourselves or to feel like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourselves for not being so comfortable on camera. But I just want people to know that everybody has a different starting point. And I've been able to get really comfortable with this type of role because of the fact that I spent so many years honing the skill in performing arts and on camera work. So definitely just keep in mind that you don't have to be perfect. And even though social media is also calling on everybody to be on camera talents as well, just know that it's really unfair on yourself to compare yourself to other people who have had training. Right. So hopefully in this conversation, I will be able to give you some tips and tricks to be able to at least improve your presence. And if you want to continue developing the skill, I do have a couple of recommendations as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruby. And I think that's a great reminder too. It's like we live in a society now where we're kind of all asked to be performers, whether it's on our Instagram accounts or, like you said, now in this like virtual world we're all living in. So yeah, reminder not to put as much pressure on ourselves, and that it takes time and practice to feel comfortable moderating or in front of a camera. And I love
It's an
that.
acquired skill for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a couple of you have trickled in. So if you have any questions for Ruby, I'm watching the chat, and we'll ask her as well. Or also when we get kind of to a Q&A, feel free to jump off of mute or video and just kind of jump in and ask the questions yourself. All right. So first question is, Ruby, how do you prep? How do you start getting ready to moderate a panel or maybe a one-on-one interview? And then is there anything you kind of do differently when preparing to moderate a panel versus kind of have that one-on-one interview with someone?
Yes, so research is key. I never go into anything without proper research. Even when I am interviewing somebody for an article, I try to do some background research on the person and read a few of the articles they've written, if any, just to be able to reference certain interesting points of their stories into your questions. One of the things that I feel like I get feedback on is that I tend to ask questions that no one else has asked, and that's because they're not general questions, they're specific to their experience, and you can't get specific. You can't know what their specificities and unique features are without actually diving into some of their stories. So I definitely recommend researching each person and finding something that you feel is unique about them or is interesting to you. A lot of times I tell people when I interview them that, hey, you said this in this article in 2017, and that really resonated with me. And that always builds a really nice rapport with the person that you're interviewing because they know that you're invested in their stories. So it's really about research, but also coming into it with the intention that you're honoring their story. It's not just about a good performance, right? It's about making sure that you are delivering quality content and that you want to be able to care enough about this person's story to tell it with with dignity, but also something that really helps them to stand out a little bit more. Another thing is you want to identify who your audience is. Because who is your audience and how can you deliver value to that audience? You're going to ask different questions if the audience is mainly small business owners versus students versus really high executive professionals, right? You want to make sure that whoever the majority of the audience is, that you are creating a conversation that is speaking to their unique needs and what will actually drive value for them. You want to know that this conversation is going to leave your audience with something that they learned. Whether or not the conversation is interesting or lively is not as important as actually the quality of the content. So just make sure that you are identifying your audience base, trying to figure out what brings value to them. The third preparation that's also really important is, as a moderator, you want your interviewee to feel comfortable. When I interviewed Sam, I had a couple phone calls with her, and I just let her know, like, hey, if anything happens, I have your back, right? Like, if you forget a piece of information or whatnot, or if anything happens in the call, like with a technical issue, you are going to be there to basically help them through and carry the conversation forward. So I think establishing that comfort with your interviewee will also help them feel more comfortable with you, so that they're not feeling nervous on camera. And then letting them know that, the conversation might have a big audience, but just focus on me and you having the conversation. And I think that helps to make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. In regards to the question of having 3 or multiple panelists versus one panelist, that does get tricky in the fact that you obviously have more than one person that you're managing the conversation with. So the research part is still, all of the above still apply, but when you're developing your questions, you want to direct specific questions to the right panelist. So I would avoid asking everybody the same questions. Of course, there are some general questions or some questions that are really interesting, but I also like to pepper in specific questions for each panelist so that each panelist gets some shine, right? So I know, for example, if Sam is really, if her specialty is human-centered sustainability, I'm going to direct that kind of question to Sam so that her expertise is gets a spotlight. So, ask a mixture of general questions that are applicable to all of your panelists, but also have some specific ones that really highlight your interviewee's expertise.
Those are great tips. Okay, I have a couple quick follow-ups. When it comes to the research point, are you kind of looking at their Instagram account, or if kind of researching if they've written any articles lately, knowing they're probably on this panel for a reason or have this specific that they want to talk about? How would that look?
Yes, exactly. So LinkedIn and Instagram are really my two favorite places to go to for research. Sometimes depending on who you're interviewing, obviously, right? Like if you're interviewing a executive, they're probably not on Instagram, but they're on LinkedIn. So and I do research. I do like to see if they've written other articles.
Okay.
That way it's, and if they've been featured in an article, anything that really helps to contextualize their background, that really is helpful in your toolkit.
Okay, great. And then you talked about doing the research, developing your questions, tailoring your questions to the different people you'll be talking to. How far in advance do you like to send those questions to people? Kind of like, what's that good time buffer? And thinking about how far in advance do you like to have that prep call or that get to know rapport building conversation with people before the event?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long people are busy and you don't want to hound them too much, but I try to at least give it like a week ahead of time for the call. And then sometimes I also need to take time to generate the questions. I think just between 4 to 5 days before the interview, I think people are generally okay with that amount of prep time, because if you send it too early, it'll just get lost in their inbox.
Yeah.
So, 4 to 5 days ahead of time, I think is a good way or a good timing to send them those prep questions.
Okay. Yeah, thinking about when they'll be prepping for that interview themselves too. That makes sense. Okay. And then, yeah, I loved your call out of I love that I knew what you were going to be asking me, and just like the reminder of I'll call your name, or like these are Sam's questions, or like this is panelist B's questions too. I think that is great. Okay, so now we've prepped. We are kind of like ready to roll. What are some things you do to make sure like you are ready to go during the panels? And I'm thinking a little bit of what you're doing while the moderating, kind of what you're thinking, or maybe how you're taking notes to just keep that conversation right, fluid, feel natural, not as like scripted, even though everyone's prepped. And then maybe a little bit on what are you doing from the tech side to make sure, we live in this virtual event world now, to make sure in event logistics kind of go nicely too.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to collaborate with somebody who is managing the tech stuff, because I definitely don't recommend being the moderator and the tech person at the same time. It's just too much.
Hold on, I want to pause right there. That is a great call out. I think I found myself sometimes doing both recently. I think that's a great reminder too, as we're thinking of like hosting events, like find a partner and find your like tech partner and maybe your like moderator partner too, because yeah, it gets stressful.
It gets very stressful, and then you're going to be flustered and it's going to show. If you're like fiddling around with the tech stuff while you're trying to ask questions, and then you're trying to remember like, oh, did I already ask that question? It's going to be way too confusing, and it's just stress that you don't need. So definitely find a tech partner to manage the tech stuff, but also to moderate the chat box. Because you can't, you need to have all of your attention on your panelists, who you're interviewing, and your audience. I always have a list of questions. Obviously, like I have my text already ready. So definitely have your script ready ahead of time. If you are going to be doing like an introduction or an outro, you might want to write out those scripts as well. I wouldn't recommend necessarily reading from there. But if you feel comfortable enough to kind of go off script, it's still really helpful. I always write my own, even whether I'm doing a speech or moderating a panel, I always write out scripts, even for my show. I definitely have a script all the time for my show, even if I don't necessarily use it, but it's just an exercise for you to be able to archive all of that information into your brain.
Yeah, I like the call out. I'm glad you called out the writing the script. I was someone who was resistant to writing scripts. I used to feel like, oh, I'm just good off the cuff, or I want to speak to this, or anytime I found myself looking at a script, I would then be like, oh gosh, I don't know where I'm headed. But I think it's kind of this learning curve, right? I was kind of using a script or only kind of writing it out. But once I've recently moved to like, I actually write out my whole script of what I want to say. That is such a good practice of internalizing it. Or if you're still kind of in that intermediate space of you kind of need to read what you wrote, I think it's good practice there, and you've written in a way that you talk to.
Yeah.
So I just want to
And
plus one the script writing. I'm now converted. It's way
yeah.
better. You're actually
And
prepped.
and I'm someone who is very comfortable with public speaking. I'm comfortable with things going on the fly, but
Yeah,
I still need my script
yeah,
because the script is the foundation and it's kind of like the rules, right? And but then you can break them once you're on stage, but you need to kind of have that foundation so that you're grounded in something.
yeah. That's great. Um, do you have any tips on script writing? Because I know it's if you haven't written a script before, it can seem kind of odd, especially if you're used to writing articles and then now you're writing to like the way you should be speaking. Do you have any kind of tips for what that should look like, or how to space it out, or formatting, or I don't know, anything small for that?
Um, the only thing is actually because I'm also a writer, and I have been writing a lot of articles over the last few years and just started doing a lot more camera work again this year, thanks to, this new world that we're living in. I actually find that it's helpful for me to just write it as if it were, if you're used to writing articles, that's fine. Write it in a formal voice, but then when you read it and you are reviewing it, try to summarize it to yourself as if you were summarizing it to your friend or to your sister. Because when you, at least you have the foundation, and then you can kind of translate it into layman's terms once you already have it, but at least you know that you have the groundwork done, and then just read it to yourself and figure out how you can kind of translate it into your speaking voice, but then at least you have the reference points.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. And then just as a reminder for anyone who's thinking about moderating remake events, the articles that Remake publishes are like a great place to start when you're thinking of like how do you take stuff that's already written so you don't have to write it fresh, and pull some great facts or kind of like one liners from there. I'll often do that when I'm doing a prepping for like a radio spot or a podcast. I'll start with Remake's articles, and then like you said, change that into my speaking voice. That's kind of been a helpful way versus like, oh, I have to write all this new content and then change it into my speaking voice too. So that's
Yeah,
good.
definitely don't reinvent the wheel and make it
Yeah.
harder for yourself. I definitely have done that. And if the resources are already available to you, especially through Remake's website, then I would just, start there.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So now if we're thinking we're prepped, the event started. Now really diving into I'd love to hear your tips for like the actual moderating during the panel, right? I'm sure you've had this happen to you where it's like, what if you have one panelist who just like really dives in and like is very verbose in how they talk? How do you time manage with your panelist? And then also, how do you kind of like push past the candid like this is my company's statement, but everyone came to have like that good juicy conversation. How do you kind of draw that out during the conversation if you feel like it's
That
happening
is
that
very
way?
tricky, and that does require a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up if if you feel like you're not able to stop your interviewee from talking. Even I still struggle with that, to be honest. And I think what it is just like if you just have to find an entry point to interrupt,
Mm.
and I know that that might not be the most helpful because it is tricky and you have to kind of have a delicate balance. But as soon as you find the opening where that person is pausing, you can just start to redirect that question. And also maybe you can look at it you can even build it into your questions. I like to say things like, what is the one piece of advice? So then it's like, that it'll be shorter. Hopefully that will stop them a little bit. Or I would say like, okay, what are 3 words that you would use to describe X, Y, and Z? I think even if you can just build it into your questions ahead of time, it
Mhm.
might help to create that space, right? That allows that person to answer succinctly. But a lot of times, if I notice that in past interviews, if I've seen that they're very verbose, I just tell them in the prep. I say, and I don't call them out and say, hey, I know you're really lengthy. So I just say, hey, we have a time limit. So I really would love to hear so much more of your perspectives, but look, we do need to keep in mind that we only have 30 minutes. And when we start talking, 30 minutes actually goes by really, really fast. So just giving them that warning already puts in their mind like, okay, maybe I need to not talk. But a lot of times you kind of just have to freestyle it and
Mhm.
feel it out, and you have to find a good entry point. As soon as they've paused, take advantage of that pause, like jump right in. And just say thank you so much, that's really, really helpful, and then try to redirect it to the next panelist, or say, that actually is a good segue into my next question, even if it wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, because I think my writing and editing work, coupled with my past experience as a performing artist and a broadcaster, I think if you're a writer and an editor, you're already naturally editing the conversation in your mind. So
Mm.
you have that, if you have that experience, it's really helpful. And if you've already prepared your script ahead of time and you're familiar with your script, even if that wasn't your next question, you'll be able to know that, oh, that was that. Thank you. That's a good segue to this question. Even if it was question 9, you can bring it up. So
Yeah.
you have to give yourself room also to be a little bit flexible, but that's where the script writing really helps you, because then you're really familiar with your content.
Yeah, I love that. Again, it's like that reminder to like if you do the prep, everything kind of like pays off in practice when you're doing it. And just a reminder of like all of this just takes diving in and doing it to get better and like in moment learning. Okay, another question I've always kind of wondered what's the balance here for moderators is how much do you create that bridge between questions, right? So we've planned our questions, we have questions for specific people. How much do you kind of wrap up what someone said versus and like make it a connection to the next piece? Or um, maybe if the next question isn't as connected, but you're moving on to someone else and a new point, how much do you bridge what they say and kind of apply your own lens to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. Um, I think that if you are if you're, what I like to do, because a lot of times in an online panel, it's hard to pay attention. Obviously, right? Like it's not the same as being in an in-person. So I do like to summarize points. So if they're asking they've just answered a question that had maybe 3 pieces of advice, or 3 main points.
Mhm.
I like to just kind of repeat it and say, so Sam, in your, as I'm hearing from you, these are the things that you would feel are successful strategies for human-centered sustainability. And I would just repeat it for the audience. I would do that as well. If you had a group of people that you're interviewing, I would pull from each person's main points and say, Sam, I really love that you said this about that. And then Laura loved this part, and Christina and Drew Mill, you also said this and this. So I like to repeat things if I know that that is a very important question. Because if that is the meat of you don't have to do it for every question, but if that question represents the meat of the conversation, you want to be able to re-establish it so that your audience remembers it. I think in regards to jumping into the next question, you could just say, like in your, you could just build it in to your like little script of like, okay, well, let's just shift gears for a little bit. This kind of language is really important to help prepare your interviewees and your audience to know that we're going to go in a different direction.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I bridge when I go into a different question. I say, okay, like, well, we've been talking about this, but let's switch gears, or let's backtrack, or let's move a little bit to this side of your work.
Mm-hmm. Again, yeah, no, yeah, I think that gets her because they get in. It's like it all connects to the story you've planned to tell and kind of like
Yes,
points you plan to cover, so you know how to drive pieces along if they kind of take a
exactly.
different route or not. I think
Exactly, but you need to know the map and
yeah,
your point A to point B to point C, so you're not lost in your own route.
yep,
Um, so
great.
yeah, it really is the prep.
That's what I'm learning. That's what I'm hearing from all of this. Okay, great. So then the next question I have is kind of around audience and engagement. And what did you think of audience engagement or when you were doing live events? And how does that work as a panelist and when you're taking questions from the audience? And then what's been kind of different, or how do you think about audience engagement now on panels with things being more virtual?
I think with things being more virtual, you obviously can't read the room. So that's hard. And you
Yeah.
can't, it's tricky as a moderator or as a panelist because you also can't feel the energy in the room, right? So, like, you don't know whether to give more, to give less.
Yeah.
Um, but you do have this magical thing like the chat button. And a lot of times you can just, um, ask people, like, for example, we didn't get to do this in the beginning, but I would love to know where everybody's tuning in from. So, let's practice this now on in this our intimate group. Like, for those who are here, like, type it into the chat, like, where you, I actually do want you to do this because I want to know. But you could type in, I'd love for you to type into the chat, like, where you're from. I've also just moderated, or not moderated, but I'm also an educator. So I just finished up like a seminar with 60 students on uh, an online platform. And I just made it really easy for them to participate because I know students, right? They're like in their early 20s. They're like not wanting to be there already. They're sick of Zoom. So I just, say stuff like, hey, put this icon into the chat box if you agree. Or just saying yes and no, like asking yes or no questions, and just making it really easy for people to type in something. But the chat box is great for trying your best to engage people. And if they do write in, shouting them out or reading their comment back to them. Like, so for example, I saw that somebody from Montreal is tuning in, which is so awesome. I've always wanted to go to Montreal. And Sam is sitting in her kitchen in San Francisco. I'd also love to go home to California. So I think that that's a way for you to easily welcome people.
Yeah.
Yeah, just very simple open-ended questions that make it's like an easy win.
Yeah, it's like how do we warm up or like make more human these virtual experiences that already feel so kind of like cold or techy or just awkward at times too. Like you said, I think
Yeah.
that was a great point. You can't feel the room anymore per se. And we're always distracted, and it's easier to be even more distracted when you're kind of like tuning in, listening on your computer, versus like I've now stepped away from my usual life to attend an event in an audience like it used to
Yeah.
be.
And when you're waiting, like in the beginning, I've done a couple of online workshops, and what I've done is I've like I would play music for a little bit, right? Like so that there's no awkwardness when you're waiting for people to trickle in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can just say, I'm gonna play a song for a bit while we get started.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's great. Well, does anyone else have any questions? That was kind of my run through for Ruby. Yeah, Ruby.
Sorry, I actually wanted to add a couple of things.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to share a tool, an unlikely tool that I realized helped me prepare for this event, or not this event, but this kind of online moderating and even hosting my own online show. Um, can you type into the chat whether or not you have or use WhatsApp? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, anybody else use WhatsApp? And I'm sharing this because I'm a sharer, right? So it's on your phone, but you always forget to check it. I would recommend that if you already have WhatsApp and you're already talking to friends, I I I'm a sharer with my girlfriends, and because I live abroad, I live in France, as I mentioned, and I love to keep in touch with my girlfriends from all over the world. Sometimes texting can be really cumbersome, so I actually leave them voice notes a lot, and leaving them voice notes and playing them back helps me to practice my speaking skills, and it also helps me to see and hear myself. And in the beginning, I remember thinking, I say a lot.
Mm.
And so in every little conversation, which is already something that I already do, I talk to them every day already. I would challenge myself to not say and I would pay attention to that. But it's a very low risk way to practice your speaking skills that's in a way that's also fun, that's natural, that can be integrated to your daily life, but helps you to just get comfortable with your speaking voice. So that's a tip that I realized, oh, I've been doing this for years. And, it's something that I already do anyways. I would do it anyway. But it also helped me become a better speaker.
Yep.
And now I'm starting to do them in French too, to my French girlfriends, because I want to improve my French language skills, and I want to know that my accent doesn't sound funny. It's always going to sound funny because I'm always going to have an American accent when I speak it, but at least it helps me to feel confident in that speaking voice. And then also, if you are invested in wanting to become a better speaker, or a better moderator, and if it's something that you actually really want to invest in the long term, I didn't tell anyone this, but I actually I was taking acting classes in the beginning of this year. Not because of any particular reason, except for the fact that I just wanted to shake things up a little bit. And I had been in my computer for so long as a writer that I had forgotten how to be an interactive person. So, if you want to take acting classes, not because you want to go into Hollywood, but it's acting classes helps you to step out of your own comfort zone, helps you to use your voice in different ways. So it helps to do that. And also improv. I know that it might be hard to do that with COVID and everything, but I actually did all of my acting classes on Zoom. That wasn't ideal, but my acting coach did one-on-one Zoom classes with us, and that was an incredible benefit that I was able to access. So it's still possible to do that in the time of COVID, but a lot of people who were in that acting class weren't just actors, but some of them were like, executives who knew that they had trouble public speaking and they needed to step out of their own box. So, and for me, I'd been writing for so long that I forgot how to be, an interactive person. And then it just so happened that I ended up having to do a lot of Zoom stuff.
Yep.
And so now here we are.
No, I love that. I'm so glad you called both of those out. I don't know if anyone is like me who's listening this. It took so long to get comfortable hearing my voice recorded. I would do conversations like this and never listen to the recording just because I was like, whatever, it's done. I can't even take it. But it's like, I was just a confidence thing. And eventually it was like, my voice is fine. It is what it is. It's like how it sounds. It's Sam's voice. And just starting to listen to my voice built confidence and was like, okay, I I'm decent at this. I can get better, but it's a good place to start. And then yeah, I love the simple thing that you called out with voice notes of just practicing these little fine-tuned pieces. And yeah, I just want to reiterate any advice I've ever been given about how to be a better public speaker has always been around like acting and improv versus specific public speaking type of stuff. So yeah, I'm so glad you called that out. That's great.
Yeah, as I said, it's an acquired skill. It just
Yeah.
takes practice.
Let's see. Drumel had a call. Or had a question. He was saying, "What are some creative ways we can engage the audience through Zoom? Have you found anything that works extra
Yeah,
nice?"
I'm trying to think of like what would be a good example. We talked about it earlier about just asking open-ended questions, asking really easy questions, things that people don't have to think about, like using the chat box for it. What else have I used?
I know I've been starting to play around with some doing polls and using those and asking them like before we get started, or like if there's a slide, having a poll so you know who's in the room, and then having a slide up where it's like, is there any one question you want answered today? And having the audience type
Yeah,
that in too. That's been kind of helpful.
that's really good. Yeah, I like that a lot.
And then
Um,
Zoom rooms are always fun, depending on how your actual whole webinar thing is situated. I know I've been a part of bigger pieces where there's kind of a bigger panel conversation, and then people get split out into Zoom rooms that are smaller for like smaller conversations. I know audiences have really enjoyed that. And then is that Kahoot? I've never heard of
I
whatever that
haven't
is.
heard Kahoot. I don't know that one. Hmm.
Do you
Yeah,
know
I'm trying
what that
to think
is?
of other ways to engage people. I know the chat is one. I like the poll idea a lot. That's good. What I don't find effective is when people do like kind of after parties on Zoom because we're not in person. So it's kind of hard to um, kind of recreate that kind of, random networking experience. Even if you are going to do a networking session, I think it still needs to be curated.
Yeah.
Um, like there needs to be some kind of framework. And again, it's just all of this stuff is just prep. So if you're going to do a networking session or like some kind of like where you're trying to replicate like a after event gathering, um, I think that there still needs to be some basic like prep of like, okay, in these next 15 minutes we're going to have, this is what we're going to do, these are the questions that we're going to have answered, or this is the person that we should invite as like an informal speaker.
Mhm.
um just to kind of corral people in a solid direction.
Yeah. I like that. Great. Well, any other questions from the live audience? If not, Ruby, do you have any parting tips or words of
Yeah, I
encouragement?
mean, I think really the point that I just want to drive home is don't put pressure on yourself. It's an acquired skill. It just takes time and practice. Those voice notes, I didn't realize, were actually really useful. So try, sending your friends voice notes. Um, and if anything else comes up, you're welcome to um, get in touch with me. My Instagram is just my first and last name, so that I'm easy to find. Yeah, and then if it's okay, like I don't know if there are no other questions, I did have two things that I wanted to invite people to.
Yeah.
Um, as I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, I host a show called Grit and Glamour. And my next episode is airing this Saturday at 11 a.m. PST. That would be 2 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Paris time. Uh, you can find the information on my Instagram, and I'm going to be featuring this weekend Aditi Mayer. So you might know her already because she is. Hold on, let me put the link into the chat because she's quite familiar with Remake. So you can find all the links to that in my Instagram. And then on my website, I also have, I'll send that here too. I have an upcoming free webinar for anybody who's interested in starting a career in sustainable fashion. It's just, I get a lot of questions about how I started my career. And even though I don't have all the answers, I think just sharing my journey might just help to clarify and inform what you might be going through. So that is still a webinar that's, I'm still figuring out the date, but if you sign up there, at least I'll be able to inform you when all of the details are set.
Cool. And I'll make sure I'll share all these with the rest of our ambassadors who weren't able to make it so they can listen. Highly recommend following Ruby on LinkedIn as well. That's where I keep up with all the awesome conversations she's having, my preferred platform. So I guess that's why. And in terms of, this was one of our first moderating workshops conversations. I think we'll be working on having more of these next year to just kind of do more behind the scenes conversations as we start hosting more events, or just think about how do we become more effective change makers, and what are the different skill sets or pieces we want to flex as ambassadors. So if you have any ideas or questions or conversations you'd love to see happen, just let me know and we'll organize them and have little ambassador only chat. So I hope this was helpful for everyone. If you have any feedback or any questions, you can email me at sam@remake.world, and I will either see y'all on an email or at our community call in November. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.